Matt Riddle. Yes, Matt Riddle is undergoing a name change in WWE. This one absolutely just blows my mind. We will get into it. I'm sure over the course of this next 10-15 minutes I will gradually go into a rant because this is crazy. This is absolute craziness. But Matt Riddle is about to undergo, or already has undergone, a name change in WWE. Now, it was reported first by PW Insider that Matt Riddle would be dropping his first name and just be going by the name of Riddle now in WWE. No question mark at the end of it, just Riddle. And this has been confirmed by WWE.com, as the WWE website team was told today to change Matt Riddle references to simply Riddle. If you go to the WWE.com roster page for Monday Night Raw now, you will just see Matt Riddle's picture with the word Riddle. No Matt Riddle being involved there. Now, it was reported that the decision was made by Vince McMahon to drop his first name because he felt it would be a better fit for him just to use his last name. Now, that's in line with what Vince McMahon has done for decades when it comes to wrestlers' name. For some wrestlers, he feels that only one name suits them better. Look at the likes of Andrade, Rusev, and the same applies here to Matt Riddle, who is now just going to be going as Riddle. Now, Matt Riddle, or should I say Riddle, was believed to be in line to be getting a major push since he debuted in the main roster this past summer, but things look to have stalled in the last few weeks for a variety of reasons. Riddle has recently been drafted to Monday Night Raw from SmackDown, which was surprising. This past Monday night on Raw, he also lost to Sheamus in a Survivor Series qualifying match. So you also have to factor in other people. I've got other examples here. I will get into this throughout the video, but you've got the likes of Andrade, Rusev, Elias, Cesaro. He just joins the latest list, I guess, Matt Riddle, in the fact that he is going by one name, and that's just Riddle. Going forward, the former UFC fighter who has been drafted over to Raw will simply be known as Riddle. And as I mentioned, PW Insider was told that the official decision was made earlier today. Where do I start? Where do I start with that? Maybe one. Here's a riddle for you. Why? Why? His name, part of the big allure of having Matt Riddle, is the fact that his name is well known. He competed in the UFC with his real name, Matt Riddle. He's got crossover appeal because people know of him in the UFC. People know his name. If you've got fans of MMA and UFC that don't watch WWE, if they hear, hey, Matt Riddle is wrestling in the WWE now, they might be inclined to watch the show. That's how crossover appeal works. You wouldn't have Brock Lesnar, and I'm not saying Matt Riddle and Brock Lesnar are the same, but you wouldn't have Brock Lesnar just come over to WWE and just be Lesnar. You know, you wouldn't have Ronda Rousey and her come over and just be Rousey. No, you have the name. You have the name. And now he's just Riddle. So you know for a fact, an absolute fact, because this is how Vince McMahon works, this is how WWE creative works, this is how Bruce Pritchard works. Bear in mind, Vince McMahon and Bruce Pritchard were the guys in charge of creative when we were getting the likes of The Goon in the 1990s and Bastion Booger. Bruce Pritchard came up with Bastion Booger and Duke the Dumpster Drosy. They were the same brain trusts in line when they were doing that in the mid-1990s. So what's the difference here? You know for a fact, given that his last name is Riddle, we are going to get a million Riddle puns on WWE TV now. In fact, they did one, I think it wasn't this week, it was last week on Raw, and it stuck out to me at the time because of how bad it was and how ridiculous it was. It was something along the lines of, my last name is Riddle, which is appropriate because I'm hard to figure out. And at the time, I sort of was a bit taken back on that. I went, oh, that was terrible. What a terrible line. I was like, whoever wrote that, whoever scripted that on the writing team, they should be fired. And now it looks like it was Vince McMahon, because it sounds like a Vince McMahon line to me. Now, I know that the Batman film is coming out next year, 2021, and that's going to have the Riddler in it. But, I mean, it's so dumb. It is so dumb, and so... It's one of those weird, strange Vince McMahon isms that makes people lose their one name, whether it's their first name or their last name, and that they only have one name that isn't reflective of real life. It's so odd, it's so strange. I mean, I mentioned the examples earlier, like Andrade, right? Throughout NXT, he was the NXT champion being Andrade Cien Almas, right? So he gets to the main roster, and then he's just Andrade. Now, I can almost understand the rationale in that one. That is a long name. That is a long name. So maybe he went, you know what, Andrade, you don't need this Cien Almas. Okay, I'll give you that one. Alexander Rusev, I guess at this point, just because we are so used to Rusev at this point that it seems okay. But what's wrong with the name Alexander Rusev? Elias Sampson just becomes Elias. And again, maybe because at this point we're conditioned that Elias Sampson sounds strange, but I don't get that one. Antonio Cesaro. I still call him Antonio Cesaro, even though he's been going by the name of Cesaro for years. And the reason why, this is why Vince McMahon is a madman, on top of a million other reasons, but this is one of the strange Vince McMahon-isms. When it came to Cesaro, he wanted to drop the name Antonio because he didn't want people to call Cesaro Tony, because Antonio can be shortened into Tony. And in his warped mind, nobody can cheer for someone called Tony. I mean, I'm not making that. That is legitimately the reason. That has been reported several times. It is ridiculous. It is absolutely ridiculous. And to be honest, when I think of Matt Riddle in WWE, this was exactly what I was worried about when the news came out Matt Riddle was going to the main roster from NXT. Once we heard that news, Matt Riddle was going to SmackDown, people were so happy. Great, Matt Riddle, he's going to SmackDown. Great, he was great in NXT. Great to see him on the main roster, see him go up against these great wrestlers. This is going to be great. And I don't want to be that cynical wrestling fan that just poo-poos everything, goes, thinks of the negative first. I don't want to be that. But when it came to Matt Riddle going to SmackDown, my first thought was, and this is my very first thought, you can go check it on social media because this is what it was. My first thought is, do you really think, in your heart of hearts, do you really think that the 75-year-old Vince McMahon and the 57-year-old Bruce Pritchard, who were doing Bastion Booger and doing Duke the Dumpster Drosy and all of that sort of stuff in the mid-90s, do you really think those two guys who are in charge of creative for Raw and SmackDown get Matt Riddle? Because if you believe that they do, then you are out of your mind. You are absolutely out of your mind. Vince McMahon didn't understand Rob Van Dam, and that was 20 years ago. Now, I'm not saying Matt Riddle and RVD are the same, but there are parallels there. These are two superstars that said bro and whatever quite a lot. And RVD, once he got signed to WWE, that's all he said in his promos, because that's all he was scripted to say in his promos was bro, whatever, and then point to himself. The parallels are there. So that was 20 years ago. So, of course, 20 years later, of course Vince McMahon doesn't get Matt Riddle. And that's what I was worried about. And wouldn't you know it, straight away we start seeing the tweaks. The Vince McMahon tweaks to the character that every NXT superstar gets at this point when they go to Raw or SmackDown straight away. You know what, let's not mention that he was a badass in the UFC. Let's not mention that, yes, he's laid back, but once he gets into the ring, he can really start beating the hell out of people. No, let's forget about that. Let's not talk about the MMA. Let's talk about his feet. Let's do a whole promo on his bare foot in the ring. Let's talk about his tootsies on SmackDown. I wrestled barefoot because I got frostbite once. Who cares about that? How on earth is that getting someone over? This is the same guy that thought changing Chad Gable to Shorty G was a vehicle to get him over. So how on earth would Vince McMahon get Matt Riddle? He doesn't. And then suddenly, again, you start hearing these little signs that tweaks are being made. And it's just these subtle things, and if you've been watching WWE for a prolonged period of time, you should start having alarm bells start to ring in your head, because then suddenly he's being called the Bodacious Barefoot Bro. And everyone, whenever they hear that, goes, oh, because it's terrible. It's terrible. And we heard that on those shows a million times, the Bodacious Barefoot Bro, the Bodacious Barefoot Bro. And it was bad the first time, but on the millionth time, it's even worse. And then he does promos, Matt Riddle, saying bro, but loads of different ways. And I know that in his promos in NXT, he said bro a lot. But there is, absolutely, the writers have upped that about 10 million % on his promos now. To the point where every other word is bro. And he's doing like dumb promos. Bro means this, but it can also mean this, just by the way you say it. And it's terrible. It is terrible. And then on top of that, he is given, the absolute kiss of death. What is his first major feud once he gets onto the main roster? What is the feud that is a great way to introduce Matt Riddle, get him over, and have the fans treat him like a serious main event level talent? Who are we going to face off against? King Corbin. The feud that everyone wants to see. I mean, nobody cared about that feud. On paper, nobody cared about that feud. Nobody cares about the King Corbin character. The King Corbin character was outdated from the moment it started. That King of the Ring character of I've won the King of the Ring, I wear a crown, I hold a scepter, I wear a cape, is done. That is done, and that is left in the 1990s. That was out of date then. The only person that's ever been able to make that work post 1995 is King Booker, because it was so over the top. Nobody cares about that. And on top of that, King Corbin has done nothing but lose since the end of last year. Whether it's a feud with Roman Reigns, a feud with Elias, and a feud with Matt Riddle, he loses every time. So how is beating him a big deal? How is that a good way to introduce a new character onto your TV show? It isn't. And then on top of that, he's facing a guy that everyone else has beat, and in reality, he doesn't really beat him because the feud was booked 50-50. Because they both beat each other on several occasions. Nobody came out of that feud looking good, and that was Matt Riddle's first feud on the main roster. And the signs that Vince McMahon doesn't get Matt Riddle are plainly there. I mentioned them earlier. It's the tweaks to the character for a while now. Whether it's the slight change to the promo, slight change to the matches. And then, of course, he was drafted to Raw, which everyone questioned straight away. They went, that's strange, because he's just debuted on SmackDown a couple of months ago. Why would he be moved to a separate brand straight away? Why was he moved to Raw? He was moved to Raw because Vince McMahon obviously isn't as keen on Matt Riddle as he was a few months ago. Because if Vince McMahon really, really liked the guy and was really, really invested in the character, he would be on the show that has the most viewers, which is Friday Night SmackDown on Fox. Now the name change, with coming from Matt Riddle to just Riddle, it's these constant tweaks of NXT superstars once they get onto the main roster. And this just reaffirms my point that I've made several times at this point. The NXT system in WWE doesn't work. It's a farce. It doesn't work. The purpose of the NXT brand and that WWE Performance Center, the purpose of the NXT brand, this Performance Center system, all of that sort of stuff is to get superstars ready for the main roster. That is the reason why it's there. So much so that you have this just plethora of characters that are there at the WWE Performance Center. They're ready to go. They can slot straight into the main roster with no adjustment, and you can put them straight on Raw and SmackDown, and there's no adjustment process. There's no trying to find their way. They are ready because you've trained them up in NXT. But every time a superstar debuts from NXT to Raw or SmackDown, they're changed. Whether it's their music, their look, their character, their gear, their promos, whether they're a heel or a babyface, it all changes to the point where they're so far removed from the features that got them over in the first place that they're not even the same character anymore, and they look lost and confused because they don't know who they are anymore. They've been stripped of their identity. Examples, Shinsuke Nakamura. What was something that was so popular about him? His entrance. Get rid of it. Bobby Roode, he was an NXT champion. He was a heel his entire time in NXT, so you debut him on the main roster as a babyface. Andrade, you take his name. Keith Lee, you change his music and you change his ring gear. Matt Riddle, you've changed his name now. You've made him more comical. Retribution, do we need to talk about them? You can't even acknowledge their NXT past. Ricochet, suddenly he's this sort of amazing high flyer in NXT, gets to the main roster, suddenly he's talking about being a real life superhero. Like that's going to get him over. Aleister Black, he had the same Aleister Black gimmick for a while, but look at him now. That isn't the Aleister Black in NXT. He's got different music, different gear. He's a heel. They do it by Vince McMahon, all the time. NXT is meant to make stars. And I always ask this question because I think it's a good one. Who is the biggest star to come out of the WWE Performance Center since it was founded and debuted in 2013? Now, obviously, on the female side of things, you've had the women's evolution. You've got Sasha Banks, Bayley, Becky Lynch. That's a given. But on the male side, there is no original star talent that has been made in that WWE Performance Center since 2013 because the system doesn't work. And some people say, well, Seth Rollins, he came through NXT. Roman Reigns, they came through NXT. Big E. That is not true. They were all there beforehand. They were all at FCW beforehand. Arguably, the biggest star to come through, the biggest original star to come through that Performance Center is Braun Strowman. And that says more than needs to be said. That Performance Center in NXT has been in place for 7 years at this point, and they haven't made an original male star. That is the top of the company. What does that say? There is an obvious disconnect between Triple H with NXT and Vince McMahon with WWE. There is. Because the characters that are created in NXT and forged in NXT just get ripped apart and remade in Vince McMahon's image in WWE. And this is just yet another example of that, with Matt Riddle and the name change. And obviously I know there's other factors when it comes to Matt Riddle. Yes, I know there's a lot of controversy about Matt Riddle right now. Lawsuits, allegations, the speaking out movements, and quite frankly, those allegations are very, very serious. And I don't think we've heard the last of them. And maybe they do play into the move to Raw, and maybe they do play into the lack or the pullback of the push that we've seen on WWE television when it comes to Riddle now. But I think that you have to look at the wider issue here, which is how WWE and NXT just doesn't work. They don't link up. And it's just mind-boggling, it really is, and it doesn't change. Every single time. Call up, you follow the same cycle all over the time. Great in NXT, call up, excitement, change, and then it just goes back down. And they go, oh, they could have been something. Why did they change that? Or why did they change from when they were in NXT? Every single time. And WWE wonders why it can't make new stars. Because they get in their own way. Because every time something has to be tweaked, something has to be changed. Or the writers and Vince McMahon have to come up to try and fix a character or a gimmick that isn't broken. And that's the biggest problem, and that is just yet another example of that when it comes to Matt Riddle and this name change. It is beyond frustrating, and just the biggest riddle is why that you've changed the name of Matt Riddle. It really is ridiculous. But of course, as always, this is just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on Matt Riddle now being just known as Riddle in WWE? What do you think about the name change? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll be sure to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys and chatting about WWE. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button as well. Really just help us out here on YouTube, go up the rankings and get to people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestling News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now, or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today, and I'll speak to you again very, very soon. Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.